The sky hung low, thick with snow-heavy clouds, as if the heavens themselves sagged under the weight of what they had seen. Wind knifed across the high plains, dragging flecks of frost like salt over an open wound. A woman stood by the broken fence line, her skirt whipping around her legs, one child asleep in the sling at her chest, the other hunched against her side, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that used to belong to his father. Her hands were raw. One gripped the fence post like it might hold her together. The house behind her, what was left of it, had gone cold 3 nights ago. The stove, once fed by split wooden promise, now stood empty. No more firewood, no more food. The last of the beans had gone to the children. Shed chewed leather to quiet her own stomach. No one had come. No one had answered the letter. A horse had passed on the main road yesterday. Shed waved with both arms, cried out until her voice shredded. The rider hadn't turned his head. Somewhere in her mind, the woman remembered warmth her husband's voice, low and steady, saying they'd be all right if they just made it through the first winter. That winter had taken him, took him hard and fast with a fever that stole his breath in 3 days flat. Buried him with his boots on, wrapped in the quilt they were married under. She mopped the grave with stones and nothing more. There hadn't been strength left for carving. Now the boy shivered under her arm. She bent down, shielding him with her body. His lips were blue. She pressed her cracked mouth to his forehead. The baby whimpered. From the ridge, the town looked close. Only a mile, maybe less. But snow-deep as a man's thigh stood between here and there, and her legs were done. Still, there was no choice. She had to move. She shifted the baby, gripped the boy's hand, and stepped out into the white. They made it half a mile before the boy dropped. At first she thought he tripped, but he didn't get back up. Just lay there, eyes half-lidded, whispering her name. She knelt, her own knees going under. The baby cried out once, then went silent again. Sleep or worse, she didn't know. She tried to lift the boy, but her arms shook. Her breath wheezed. She screamed, long and dragged, into the wind, not even knowing who she was calling for. God, her husband, a neighbor. The snow swallowed her voice. And then, faintly, the sound of hoof. She turned. He came out of the white like something imagined, tall in the saddle, hat low, coat flapping like a banner, horse lathered and steaming. He slowed when he saw her, pulling the reins in gently like approaching a wild animal. "Mum," he said. That was all. She blinked up at him. Her lips tried to shape a word, but nothing came. He swung down, stepped close. He looked young, maybe 30, sun-cut lines in his face. He knelt by the boy, touched his wrist, then looked at her. "You got more in you." She shook her head. No shame left in her, just cold. Without another word, he slipped his arms under the boy, hoisted him up, walked to the horse, lifted the child into the saddle and looped his coat around him. "Give me the baby," he said, voice quiet but sharp enough to break ice. She hesitated, arms tight around the bundle. Then she let go. He tucked the baby under his coat. Then he turned back to her. "I can ride with all 3, but you'll have to walk. You'll keep close." She nodded. One step, then another. The wind picked up again, lashing sideways. She stumbled, nearly fell. A hand caught her elbow, rough gloved, steady. He didn't speak after that. Just walked beside her, horse plodding behind, snow crunching under each careful step. The sun never came out. The wind never eased. But she moved, because he moved with her. And when the town finally rose out of the storm like a promised low roofs with smoke railing weakly upward, she wept. Not loud, not even with tears. Just a quiet, broken sound in her throat, like thawing ice giving way. They brought her to the church first. The parson's wife, Mrs. Talbot, met them at the threshold, eyes wide with something between fear and pity. She didn't ask questions, just took the baby, wrapped her in warm linens, and disappeared into the back room without a word. The boy had started shaking again. The cowboy carried him to the stove and stripped off the snow-wet coat, crouched there with him, one hand on the boy's back as the fire began to take. The woman Clara stood in the doorway a moment longer, unsure she was welcome. The snow had crusted to her hem and her boots had soaked through. She felt like a ghost who'd wandered in off the prairie. The cowboy turned his head. "Come on in. You're all right now." She stepped in. The door shut behind her. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the low pop of the stove and the boy's soft breathing growing steadier by the minute. Claire sat down hard on the wooden bench by the window. Her fingers were stiff, and it took time to peel off the gloves. Inside, her skin was red and dry, knuckles split open like old wood. She folded her hands in her lap so no one would see. "You got folks?" the cowboy asked. She shook her head. "Dead or gone." "Where were you headed?" "We weren't headed nowhere. We were already there. Place out past the bend in the creek. Built it with my husband." Her voice caught. "Before you passed." He nodded once, like he understood more than he let on. "You staying there alone since?" "Had to." He didn't speak again right away. Instead, he rubbed his hands together in front of the stove, long fingers moving slow, methodical. His coat was patched at the shoulders, and his boots had seen years, but there was something clean about him. Not neat, just honest. Mrs. Talbot returned with the baby in her arms. She's sleeping now. Warmed her up with milk and wool. "You're real lucky, miss. Could have gone worse." Clara looked down at the floor. "I don't feel lucky." The cowboy rose to his feet and stepped aside as the parson's wife handed the baby back. "There's a room upstairs," she said. "It ain't much, but it's warm. You and the little ones can stay through the storm." Claire didn't answer. Her throat had closed up again. Later, when the children were tucked into a real bed and her hands had stopped shaking, she found him in the barn. He was brushing down the horse by lantern light, his motions slow and even. "You never said your name," she said. He didn't turn. "Jonas. Why do you stop?" He paused, hand resting on the horse's withers. "Didn't seem right not to." Clara stepped closer. The straw crunched under her boots. Plenty others passed by. No one else stopped. He looked at her then. Really looked. Some folks forget how to see. She didn't know what to say to that. The cold had left her bones, but not her mind. Part of her still crouched in the snow, waiting for the next blow. "I'm sorry I didn't thank you," she said. "You don't owe me thanks." "Yes, I do." He nodded, but didn't argue. They stood like that for a while. The wind outside scraped along the boards, but inside it was quiet, save for the soft huff of the horse and the ticking of the lantern. "Where do you come from?" she asked. "Wyoming Territory. Family ranch. Got tired of fighting over fence lines and dying cattle." "You ranchin' now?" "Driftin' mostly. Do some work when it comes. Keep moving." She folded her arms. "You gonna keep moving now?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Depends if I'm needed." The horse snorted softly and pressed its head against his chest. Jonas stroked its muzzle. "I got no money," she said. "Nothing left, not really. Just what's in my head and what I can do with my hands." Jonas looked over his shoulder at her. That might be more than most. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but maybe something close to the memory of it. "Thank you," she said again. This time her voice was stronger. He gave a small nod and went back to brushing the horse. If the land felt honest, subscribe for more truth. By morning the storm had eased. Snow still coated the rooftops and blanketed the road like a burial cloth, but the wind had gone quiet. Smoke curled from chimneys. The world was still cold, but it had softened. Clara rose before the children, moving like someone relearning her own limbs. She washed her face in the cracked basin upstairs, braided her hair, and dressed quietly in the same threadbare clothes from the day before. Her body ached, but not in the way it had during the storm. This ache was familiar work ache, survival ache. She could carry it. Downstairs, Jonas was already at the stove, warming his hands around a chipped mug. He glanced up when she entered but didn't speak. Just poured another cup and held it out to her. She took it, nodding once. The coffee was bitter and weak, but it was hot. It settled something inside her. "Ill worked," she said, without preamble. "I can clean, sew, mend. I know how to take care of animals, keep a fire lit, split wood. I'm not looking for charity." Jonas studied her a long moment. "I didn't think you were. Just saying it plain." He sipped his coffee. "That place of yours out by the creek still standing?" She hesitated. "Mostly. Roof's patchy. Back walls sagged some when the snow came heavy. But the bones are there." He nodded. "Could be fixed." Clara glanced toward the window where the pale morning light fought through the frost. Could. They didn't talk more that morning. But Jonas didn't leave. He helped the parson mend the fence behind the church, worked quiet with his head down and shoulders steady. Clara cleaned the sanctuary, swept up the mud and melted snow tracked in by boots, folded laundry for the parson's wife without being asked. The children stayed upstairs, sleeping deeper than they had in weeks. That first full day passed with the shape of something like order. By the third day, Jonas saddled his horse and drove out early. Clara watched him from the upstairs window, her arms wrapped around the baby, the boy leaning sleepy against her hip. She didn't expect him to return, but he did. That afternoon, with a cart hitched to his horse and lumber stacked high. "Salvaged from the mill," he said, unloading planks onto the churchyard grass. "Owner owed me from last season. Figured you'd need this." Clara stood there blinking. "You mean to help me rebuild?" He met her eyes. "If you have it." She didn't answer, just took one end of the plank he held out. Jonas taught her how to brace a sagging wall with angled supports. She showed him how to keep a fire burning even when the wood was wet, how to boil bone for broth when there was no meat. They didn't talk much about their pasts, but they didn't need to. Some evenings when the children were asleep, they sat by the fire and shared coffee in silence. Once she asked if he had anyone waiting for him. He shook his head. "Had a brother. Died in a flood. Folks are gone. I stayed too long in one place once. Didn't end well." She didn't press. That was enough. Jonas never stepped over a line. He slept in the barn, kept his distance. But when the boy fell and bloodied his lip, Jonas was the one who sat him on the porch rail, calmed him down, cleaned the cut with snow and patience. When the baby wouldn't sleep, he walked her gently in his arms outside until she quieted. Claire watched all this from the shadows of the doorway, unsure of what it meant, what he wanted. One night, the boy crawled into Jonas's lap by the fire without asking. Just climbed up like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jonas didn't speak, just held the boy there, his hand resting light on the child's back. Clara saw his face then unmasked, unguarded. There was sorrow in it, not loud or gaping, just there, deep and still. She turned away, her heart too full and too afraid to name what she was feeling. Spring came slow. The snow melted in pieces, bearing dead grass and mud, slick stone. The creek behind the house swelled with runoff and then settled again, low and steady. Buds crept out on the cottonwoods. The wind softened. The days grew long. The house stood again, not proud but solid. Jonas had rebuilt the back wall with salvaged timber, added braces to the roof, and dug out the root cellar that had caved in during the storm. Clara had sewn new curtains from flour sacks, mended the bedding, and scrubbed the soot from the hearth sign until her knuckles bled. They worked like people who had nothing left to lose but time. Sometimes he brought her things without a word. A tin of lye soap, a bag of coffee, nails wrapped in oiled cloth. Once he left a scarf folded on the porch rail. She found it before dawn and wore it that day without comment. He never asked to stay. He just didn't leave. In town, people watched them, some with curiosity, others with something colder. The widow and the drifter building a home with no ring, no priest, no witnesses. Clara felt the stares when she traded eggs for flour, when she carried the baby on her hip through the store. But no one said anything to her face. Not yet. That changed in May. They were coming out of the feed store when they saw the wagon, white canvas stretched over worn beams, pulled by two sway-back mules. A woman sat on the bench seat, but it was the man beside her who made Jonas stop in his tracks. "Called her," he said under his breath. Clara looked at him. His face had gone still. The man stepped down, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 10 years older than Jonas. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you still here." Jonas nodded once. "Didn't expect to be." The woman in the wagon shifted her eyes away. She looked ashamed. Calder stepped closer, voice dropping. "You sure you know what you're doing? This ain't Wyoming. Folks, that widow's got baggage. You really fixin' to play house with some other man's mistakes?" Clara felt the words hit before she fully heard them. Her arms tensed. The baby stirred against her chest. Jonas didn't flinch. "You got no business here." Calder grinned. You always did get soft for broken things. Jonas moved, then quick, not loud. He was in Calder's face before anyone could blink, his hand fisted in the man's collar. Don't speak to her. Don't speak about her. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Jonas stepped back and turned to Clara. We're going. They walked the whole way home in silence, even the baby quiet, as if she sensed the shift in the air. Clara didn't ask what Calder was to him. She already knew. The kind of man who knew your weak points because he helped make them. That night after the children were asleep, she found Jonas on the porch, staring out over the dark fields. He was family, she asked. Once. He hurt you? Jonas nodded. When I was too young to stop it. Not with fists, just words, promises. Took a piece of me with him when he left. Clara sat beside him. The air smelled of thawed earth and pine smoke. She spoke slowly. He didn't take all of it. Jonas looked at her, eyes shadowed. I don't want to be him. You're not. I've got nothing to give you but calloused hands and a name I don't use much anymore. She reached for his hand. That's already more than I've had. They sat like that until the moon rose high. The night was still. No need to speak more. They understood each other now in the way people do who've both survived something they can't name out loud. Summer arrived with its own kind of silence, hot, thick, and watchful. The fields around the house dried and yellowed under the sun. Wind stirred dust through the barn rafters, and the creek ran slow and low. Life didn't get easier, but it steadied. Clara knew every board in the house now, every creak of the porch, every trail that deer took through the back pasture. The days weren't gentle, but they were hers. Jonas built a fence around the garden plot. The boy helped, hammering bent nails with both hands, his face set with determination. The baby had started to walk, one teetering step at a time, gripping the furniture like it might drift away. Clara sewed at night by lamplight. She repaired Jonas's shirts, made new clothes for the children, even pieced together a quilt from scraps of her husband's old coat. Not to hold on to grief, but because nothing here was wasted, even memory. One evening after supper, Jonas sat on the porch sharpening a knife, the scrape of stone steady and slow. Clara came out with a cup of coffee and handed it to him. Town's talkin', she said, folding her arms. Jonas took the cup. Let 'em. They say you're livin' here now. That we ain't proper. He didn't answer right away. Just looked out at the line of hills in the distance, dark against the orange sky. I reckon they're right, he said. We ain't proper. Clara waited. He set the knife aside, wiped the blade clean, and turned to her. But I've never lived this quiet before. Never felt right in my own skin the way I do now. She met his gaze. Then what ray we wait in for? Jonas tilted his head. Meanin' if you're stay in, you don't need to sleep in that barn anymore. And if we're gonna live under the same roof, it ought to be honest. Something shifted in his face, relief maybe, or fear, maybe both. You sure? She stepped forward, close enough to feel the heat off his skin. I've lived through worse than a good man with bad luck. He looked down, smiled, small and quiet. All right. The next week, they rode into town together and spoke to the parson. It was simple. No white dress, no piano hymns. Just Clara in her mended skirt, the boy holding her hand, and Jonas standing beside her like he belonged there, because he did. The parson read a passage. Clara didn't hear most of it. She was watching Jonas's hands, calloused, strong, and steady, wrapped around hers like they were part of the same story now. They signed the ledger and walked out of the church into the sun. Back home, the boy tied a crooked piece of white cloth to the porch rail, and Mrs. Talbot brought pie. The baby toddled through the grass with wild joy, squealing every time she fell down. That night, Clara and Jonas stood at the edge of the field, watching the sky fade to indigo. I used to dream of this, she said, before everything went wrong. Jonas slipped an arm around her waist. And now? She leaned against him. Now I don't have to dream it. He kissed her then, not like a promise, but like a truth already lived. They went inside together. Autumn rolled in quiet, gold brushed and smoke-scented. The fields turned brittle, the air thin. Mornings came with frost on the porch rail, and the children began waking with cold fingers tucked beneath the quilts. Clara laid out kindling each night, kept the fire banked, taught the boy to check the draft and feed the stove before sunrise. Jonas worked the land with quiet devotion. He was a farmer by nature, but he had the hands for it, and the stubbornness. They split wood, fenced off pasture, planted bulbs Clara had saved from her old garden. She showed him how to turn the soil just so, how to hang onions in the pantry rafters. They didn't speak much during the work, but every day brought a rhythm, a rightness. Still, nothing in life comes without testing. It started with a letter. Arrived in town on a Monday, sealed in plain brown paper. Clara found it in her coat pocket after trading butter at the store. Her name scrawled on the front. No return. No stamp. She opened it by lamplight, alone in the pantry, her breath already tight before she'd read the first word. It was from her late husband's cousin Walter Sims, a man she hadn't seen in nearly 4 years, one who deep passed through their homestead once, sniffed at the empty fields, and called it a fool's venture. Now, he wrote of debts and legal rights, claimed the land had never been properly deeded to her after her husband's death, that by blood, it belonged to him. He would be arriving in 2 weeks to discuss transition of ownership. Clara read the letter twice. Her hands were shaking. She said nothing to Jonas that night. Not yet. The next morning, she walked the full length of the field, boots sinking into soft, damp earth, the letter tucked inside her coat. Every inch of land felt alive with memory. Her husband's voice, her children's laughter, the hammer of Jonas's work. She stopped at the garden, now browning at the edges, and stared at the fence they had built together. When she turned back to the house, Jonas was standing in the doorway. "You look like you've seen ghosts," he said. "Worse," she said quietly, and handed him the letter. He read it slow. When he finished, he folded it once and slid it into his back pocket. "That man shows up here," he said. "I'll get a fire and coffee. But not this land." Clara stared at him. "We don't have proof." "I don't need proof to know it's right." "But he could take everything." "H.E.S. got paper. A name." Jonas stepped toward her, his jaw tight. "Then we fight him." She blinked. "You mean legally?" "I mean with whatever it takes." That night Jonas rode into town, returned with 2 things: a deed lawyer from up north willing to look at the papers, and a quiet man named Joseph who knew every land grant made in the last 20 years. For 5 days they pored over old maps, Clara's marriage license, the bill of sale her husband had never filed. Jonas barely slept. The boy watched them from the hallway with wide eyes, and Clara kept the baby on her hip, walking circles through the kitchen just to keep her nerves still. The night before Walter Sims was due, Jonas took Clara's hand. "You ready?" "No," she said, "but I'm not afraid." In the morning the wagon rolled up their road like a vulture. Walter Sims stepped down in polished boots, wearing a smirk and a suit better suited to a courtroom than a homestead. Clara stood on the porch, Jonas behind her, the boy clutching the edge of her skirt. "You've come a long way," she said, "but you won't be staying." Walter laughed. "You've got no claim, Clara. You were just a wife. The land was in Nathan's name. There's no will, no deed transfer." "Not to me," she said, "but he filed a transfer to our boy. It's signed, and now it's recorded. You want to try and take it from a child, you go ahead. See how far it gets you in court." Jonas stepped forward then, quiet and wide-shouldered, arms folded. The lawyer and Joseph stood behind him, watching. Walter blinked, faltered. "You think you can scare me with this circus?" "No," Jonas said, "but I can show you the road back to town." It was a fight in the end. Walter spat on the ground, muttered something about fools and lost causes, and climbed back in his wagon. The wheels turned slow at first, then faster as he disappeared down the trail. When the dust finally settled, Clara let out a long breath she'd been holding for 4 days. Jonas looked at her. "It's yours now." She looked back at him. "Ours." He didn't argue. Winter came again, quiet and white, the kind of winter that didn't roar in, but crept layer by layer, until one morning the world woke up hushed, every surface softened by snow. Smoke curled from the chimney before dawn. The roof held. The walls held. Inside, so did the people. The boy had grown taller, his boots too small now. Jonas carved a new pair from scrap leather and rabbit hide. The baby, no longer a baby, spoke her first full sentence that December. "Mama, look, snow." Clara wept quietly in the pantry when she heard it, her hands braced on the flower shelf to keep from sinking to the floor. Jonas worked beside her every day, chopping wood, mending fence, cooking when she was too tired to move. He didn't speak love the way some men did. He didn't say it, but Clara knew it in how he'd rub the children's backs when they cried at night, or the way he'd checked the windows twice during storms to be sure no cold snuck in. One night, after the children were asleep, she found him in the barn again. The lantern hung low from the rafter, and he was sitting with his back against the stall, coat unbuttoned, rubbing his eyes. She stepped in, pulling the door closed behind her. "You all right?" she asked. He looked up, startled at first, then softened. "Didn't hear you come in." She knelt beside him, smoothing the hay out of her skirt. "You look tired." He nodded. "Been thinking about this life, this place." She waited. "Used to think I was meant for it. Family, land. Thought I'd pass through things and not leave a mark. Safer that way." Clara leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "And now? Now I wake up every day thinking I don't deserve what I've got." She reached for his hand, wrapped it in both of hers. "That's how I know you do." He turned toward her, his face shadowed in the lantern light, but his voice was steady. "I want to raise them here. See the boy grow tall. Teach the girl to ride. Plant wheat maybe. Stay through the seasons. You already are." He hesitated. "I want to give you something that lasts. Not just this house. Something that don't break easy." Clara smiled, small and tired and real. "You already have." He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with gravity, the way someone might kiss home. That spring she found out she was carrying another child. She told him one morning while he was cleaning his hands at the pump, the sun just touching the tops of the trees. He looked at her, blinked once, and said nothing. Then he dropped to his knees in the dirt and pressed his forehead to her belly, one hand against her hip, like he was thinking something deeper than words. Later he carved a small wooden ring and slid it onto her finger as the children watched from the porch. "No preacher needed," he said. "This is just between us." The land stayed hard, and the days never got easy, but they were full. They added on to the house, one room at a time, planted fruit trees, saved seed, taught the children how to feed the hens and tie proper knots. They made a life, one made of sweat and mistakes and forgiveness, and love, quiet, constant love that wrapped around them like the wind on the open plain. Not always gentle, but always there. One evening years later, as the sun dipped low behind the cottonwoods, Clara stood on the porch, baby on her hip, another child leaning against her leg. Jonas came up from the field, boots heavy with dust, eyes tired but bright. She smiled at him as he climbed the steps. He touched her cheek, kissed her forehead, and said only home. And it was. Right through the quiet subscribe and stay.